Something happened today that has no explanation in the known laws of physics, and the world's most advanced space agencies are in emergency session right now trying to make sense of it. NASA's Deep Space Network has just logged an event from the object known as 3I Atlas, an event carrying a 0.00001% probability of being natural in origin. 3I Atlas just parked itself. It did not collide with anything. It was not flung into position by a gravitational slingshot. It actively and deliberately balanced itself directly on the Earth-Sun Lagrange 2 point. The data is unambiguous, and what the telemetry reveals has absolutely no precedent in the entire history of modern astronomy. Picture this. An object, supposedly a rogue comet from deep interstellar space, hurtling toward our inner solar system at tremendous velocity. And then, exactly 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, it simply bleeds off its momentum and slips into a perfect, stable halo orbit. Precision that tight requires control. It requires intention. Think about that for a moment. In all the years humanity has spent studying theoretical physics and celestial mechanics, we have never once witnessed a purely ballistic object execute a maneuver like this. A comet does not simply decide to stop at a gravitational parking spot. To truly grasp what this means, you need to understand what the L2 point actually is. It is essentially a cosmic balancing act, a precise region in the vacuum of space where the gravitational pull of the Sun and Earth perfectly cancels out with the centripetal force needed for a small object to orbit alongside them. It is inherently unstable for natural bodies. Think of it like trying to balance a sharpened pencil on its very tip atop a spinning plate. To remain in place, even our most sophisticated human-made satellites, like the James Webb Space Telescope, require continuous, mathematically calculated thruster burns known as station-keeping maneuvers. Yet 3I Atlas is currently sitting there, maintaining a positional accuracy within 0.03 degrees, without any detectable propulsion, without any visible thruster system, without a comet's characteristic tail that could even theoretically act as a natural nudge. The numbers are definitive. NASA's own trajectory models predicted 3I Atlas would bypass our solar system entirely, passing us without incident. The European Space Agency's Gaia spacecraft calculations reached exactly the same conclusion, yet both models were mathematically wrong. When you examine the raw data, you are forced to confront a deeply uncomfortable truth, that our fundamental assumptions about interstellar objects may need to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. Everyone has assumed 3I Atlas is a dead rock, or perhaps a drifting chunk of dirty ice. But the data is beginning to suggest something far more extraordinary. When an object precisely navigates into one of the most gravitationally delicate coordinates in our entire solar system, we have to ask the question that no scientist in a press conference wants to answer out loud. If it is not a rock and it is not a comet, then what is currently hovering just beyond the orbit of our moon, perfectly still, staring back at us? Even the most conservative astrophysicists at Harvard and MIT are now in the process of reevaluating every piece of telemetry ever gathered on this object. When institutions of that caliber take emergency action, when the people who built the models admit the models are broken, we need to pay very close attention. This is a physical impossibility playing out in real time. And what you have heard so far is only the beginning of this story. So what exactly is 3I Atlas, and how did we get here? When it was first discovered, it was initially classified as an interstellar comet, the third of its kind ever documented, following the famous Oumuamua and Borisov objects. But from the very moment it entered our solar system, it was a statistical outlier. The first red flag was its albedo, the efficiency with which it reflects light. The numbers defied every standard model built around carbon-rich or ice-based compositions. Scientists were already puzzled before the real anomaly began. Consider the scale of what we are dealing with. A mass estimated at 33 billion tons, traveling at a blistering 87.63 kilometers per second. By every model and every projection, it was supposed to be a fleeting visitor, a brief, blazing streak of light crossing our cosmic doorstep and moving on into the void. Then the narrative fractured completely. The James Webb Space Telescope's NIRCam instrument was the first to detect the deceleration as 3I Atlas crossed the orbit of Mars. Its velocity began to drop, not by a negligible fraction of a percent that could be attributed to solar wind pressure or natural outgassing, but a sustained mechanical braking maneuver unlike anything ever recorded. The deceleration curve was perfectly smooth. It reduced its speed by exactly 12.4 kilometers per second over a 48-hour window. The scientific community does not have a natural explanation for this. Comets do not have brakes. In the vacuum of space, an object carrying that much mass requires an immense and highly directed expenditure of energy to alter its momentum so drastically. The kinetic energy equations simply do not balance. The numbers, when examined carefully, demand a source of force that our instruments cannot detect. What happened next only deepened the mystery. 3 entirely independent observation systems, using completely different methodologies, all arrived at the identical conclusion. NASA's Deep Space Network antenna detected the anomalous trajectory shift. The ESA's Gaia spacecraft independently verified the exact deceleration curve using its astrometric sensors. The ALMA array in Chile cross-referenced the thermal emissions and yielded the exact same result. 3 sources, 3 methods, 1 answer. And that answer breaks our models. Here is the best analogy to make this tangible. Imagine throwing a baseball perfectly straight, only for it to slow down mid-flight and gently hover just before reaching the catcher's mitt. Now multiply that scenario by the cosmic scale of a 33 billion-ton object traveling at interstellar velocity. There was no cometary coma, no jets of gas venting into the surrounding space, no thermal bloom that could explain even a fraction of the kinetic energy that simply vanished. From a purely thermodynamic standpoint, if we insist on the comet hypothesis, a natural body cannot shed that much momentum without an equal and opposite reaction visible somewhere across the infrared or ultraviolet spectrum. Yet the object remained thermally cold. Baseline readings confirmed and reconfirmed multiple times. To achieve this deceleration naturally, 3I Atlas would have needed to expel roughly 15% of its total mass in a precisely directed, focused jet. The ALMA array confirmed 0 mass loss, 0 outgassing. The object remained entirely intact while shedding velocity, as if it were interacting with a frictional medium that simply does not exist in the emptiness of space. The conventional escape hatch in moments like this is instrument error, a miscalibration, a software glitch, a cosmic coincidence compounding into a false signal. But what if every instrument is telling the truth? Because what happened next eliminates coincidence as a possibility. After the inexplicable deceleration came something even harder to dismiss, a deliberate change in trajectory. 3I Atlas was no longer following the path that 99.8% of all known comets take, angling toward the Sun for a close solar pass known as a perihelion. Instead, it was aiming for a specific mathematical point in space, Earth's L2 Lagrange point. And the adjustments it made to get there were not rough or approximate. They were micro-precise. At T-minus 48 hours to arrival, the object executed a 0.004 degree yaw correction. 24 hours later, another correction. This time precisely 0.012 degrees, perfectly aligning its path with the gravitational saddle point sitting 1.5 million kilometers behind our planet. Right now, as you are reading these words, 3I Atlas is stationary relative to Earth. Its positional lock is maintained within 2.4 kilometers of the theoretical perfect center of the L2 gravitational well. Let that precision sink in for a moment. Each maneuver is mathematically more impossible than the one before it. Across millions of years of cometary observation, humanity has never once documented a celestial body actively steering itself into a stable orbit around a Lagrange point. Comets are not guided. They are governed entirely by gravity, momentum, and the physics of whatever they are made of. 3I Atlas is doing something fundamentally different. To understand the full magnitude of this, consider the orbital mechanics involved. The L2 point is essentially a gravitational pinhead, a specific, incredibly narrow zone in space. Navigating into it from interstellar distance is the equivalent of firing a rifle from New York and striking a specific coin resting on a table in Los Angeles, all while accounting for the gravitational influence of the moon. The precision required is not just remarkable, it strains the very concept of coincidence past its breaking point. When you examine the data closely, it stops feeling like an astronomical anomaly and begins to feel like an intentional, calculated arrival. And yet, even parked in this precise gravitational sweet spot, the object remains completely silent across the electromagnetic spectrum. No radio signals, no unusual light patterns, no thermal emissions. It is simply there, a 14-kilometer wide mass sitting in our cosmic backyard, balanced against the combined gravity of the Earth and the Sun, behaving in ways that our entire scientific framework cannot accommodate. Then came the next layer of impossibility. The object began executing micro-oscillations, tiny, continuous positional corrections that were not predicted by any model and were not present in earlier observations. It was not simply resting in the L2 zone. It was actively maintaining its position against solar wind pressure and gravitational perturbations, without thrusters, without any detectable mass ejection, and without a thermal footprint. No heat signature at all, confirmed 3 separate times by 3 separate instruments. If you could zoom out to the cosmic scale, the picture looks like a dead rock perfectly surfing a gravitational razor's edge, making continuous, flawless, rhythmic corrections every 45 minutes with an accuracy of 0.002 degrees. That rhythmic cycle is not random. Random processes do not produce regular intervals. And then there is the energy problem, a problem that, on its own, rewrites the textbook. 3I Atlas is absorbing solar radiation, but it is not re-emitting that energy as heat. Thermodynamically, this is not supposed to be possible. Imagine an ice cube sitting in direct sunlight that refuses to melt, simply absorbing the heat and remaining frozen. Now scale that up to a 14-kilometer object. The energy is going somewhere, being stored or being used. And whatever it is being used for, we are about to find out. Before we go further, the statistical case alone deserves a moment of clear-eyed examination, because the numbers have become impossible to rationalize away. Let us assign the most generous possible probabilities to each of the anomalies we have observed. The probability of a rogue comet naturally decelerating by exactly 12.4 kilometers per second without any outgassing or detectable mass loss, a highly charitable 0.001%. The probability of its resulting trajectory perfectly intersecting the Earth-Sun L2 Lagrange point from interstellar space, approximately 0.00005%. Now multiply those together and then factor in the sustained, active station keeping that followed. The combined probability yields a statistical absurdity, roughly 1 chance in 200 billion. That is the mathematical equivalent of flipping a coin and having it land perfectly on its edge 10,000 consecutive times. In the entire history of cometary observation, we have never seen this combination of behaviors in a single object. And the scientific community is beginning to say so publicly. Dr. Avi Loeb at Harvard, who has spent decades studying interstellar objects and the physics of anomalous trajectories, stated that the mechanical precision of 3I Atlas cannot be reconciled with a natural origin. When a researcher of that standing makes that kind of public statement, it is not a casual opinion. It is a conclusion drawn from evidence. The Jet Propulsion Laboratory rerouted emergency deep space observation time to focus entirely on this object. Institutions do not commit those kinds of resources on a whim. When the people who built our understanding of orbital mechanics begin treating a single object as a priority emergency, the scientific consensus is not shifting. It has already shifted. And then came the anomaly that eclipsed everything before it. The flight dynamics team at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center detected something completely absent from any prior data stream, something that had no business existing in the orbital mechanics of a comet. The trajectory of 3I Atlas altered in a purely non-gravitational acceleration event, but the adjustment was not random. It perfectly matched a station-keeping maneuver executed by the James Webb Space Telescope, the correction occurring in near-perfect synchronization with the telescope's own thruster burn. The margin of error between the two movements was 0.005%. A 33 billion-ton mass is actively mirroring the exact halo orbit of our most sophisticated astronomical observatory. It is flying in formation. Think carefully about what that means. The JWST fires its thrusters to maintain position, and 3I Atlas mimics the precise delta-v adjustment within a window so tight it cannot be explained by gravitational coincidence. There is no known mechanism, natural or theoretical, by which a comet shadows a satellite. This is not an approximation. This is synchronization. 3 independent observation teams validated the mirrored movement pattern. The mathematics cannot be dismissed by the mainstream academic community any longer. And within hours of this telemetry match being confirmed, NASA and ESA did something completely unprecedented in modern space exploration. They initiated a full communications blackout on JWST's non-essential public data feeds and convened an emergency closed-door session at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. In 60 years of modern space exploration, that specific protocol has been triggered only in the rarest of circumstances. That action alone tells you the magnitude of what is being processed behind closed doors. Imagine sitting at a live telemetry display, watching a mountain-sized object purposefully dance with the most fragile, most valuable scientific instrument humanity has ever deployed. In the freezing silence of space, 1.5 million kilometers from home, the object is not drifting. It is not coincidentally nearby. It is following us. Let us now step back and consolidate everything that has been rigorously confirmed, because it is critical to separate documented observation from speculation before we reach the only question that actually matters. First, 3I Atlas decelerated by exactly 12.4 kilometers per second, bleeding off momentum without any detectable thermal outgassing, mass ejection, or radiation bloom. This behavior defies every standard model of cometary physics. Second, the statistical probability of a natural celestial body actively navigating into the Earth-Sun L2 Lagrange point from interstellar space is less than 1 in 200 billion, a number so remote it functionally ceases to qualify as probability. Third, the highest authorities at both NASA and ESA independently confirmed these orbital mechanics and subsequently triggered unprecedented data blackouts across multiple international observation networks. Fourth, the 33 billion-ton object is now actively mirroring the exact station-keeping thruster burns of the James Webb Space Telescope with a margin of error below 0.005%. These are not theoretical models. They are not preliminary readings awaiting confirmation. These are thoroughly documented, rigorously examined physical observations, cross-verified by multiple independent instruments using different methodologies. The data is what it is. And yet, one question sits at the absolute center of all of it, the question that official NASA briefings and ESA classified reports carefully sidestep in their public statements. What is powering the non-gravitational acceleration keeping this object perfectly tethered to our greatest observatory? Because the answer to that question determines everything about our understanding of the cosmos and our place within it. Every framework we apply leads us to a different and equally staggering conclusion. If this is a radically unknown gravitational shadowing effect, a phenomenon not accounted for in any existing model, then our entire framework of celestial mechanics requires a foundational rewrite. Dark matter interactions near Lagrange points, gravitational resonance effects operating at scales we have never measured. These are concepts that would restructure physics as a discipline. If this is a dormant, naturally occurring fragment of exotic matter, a relic of conditions that existed in the early universe, then we have discovered a new physical state sitting right in our cosmic backyard, something that absorbs energy without emitting heat, that resists momentum without expelling mass, that exists in a state of matter our instruments were not designed to detect. That finding alone would be the most important scientific discovery in human history. And if it is artificial, if this object is utilizing a propulsion system that produces zero thermodynamic waste, actively studying the most advanced telescope our civilization has ever built, then we are looking at something that arrived here deliberately, from somewhere else, carrying technology that surpasses ours by an interval of time we cannot meaningfully estimate. Millions of years, perhaps more. There is no moderate interpretation available. One of these three scenarios is the correct one, and the evidence, as it currently stands, does not comfortably accommodate the first two. What makes this moment so singular is that the object is not hiding. It is not passing through. It positioned itself precisely at the one location in our solar system where our most powerful eyes are already pointed. It moved into the neighborhood of our most advanced scientific instrument, and then it began to mirror that instrument's movements with precision our own engineers would find difficult to replicate deliberately. Whatever 3i Atlas is doing at L2, it chose that location knowingly. The clock is not slowing down. Every hour, the Deep Space Network collects new telemetry. Every hour, something changes. And in a narrow window of time, the James Webb Space Telescope is scheduled to execute its next major orbital correction maneuver. The ground-based optical arrays are precisely locked. The thermal infrared detectors are operating at full sensitivity, and 3i Atlas is still there, holding position, maintaining synchronization, doing something in the dark that we do not yet have the language to describe. We are at a turning point, not just in this story, but potentially in the story of our species. Every thread of evidence gathered across every instrument, every independent verification, every emergency protocol triggered at the highest levels of our space agencies converges on a single unavoidable reality. 3i Atlas is not behaving like anything that has ever entered our solar system before, and the implications of that statement extend far beyond the world of astronomy. Think about what the synchronization data actually tells us. This object did not arrive and passively drift into our neighborhood. It found the specific gravitational zone where our most advanced observatory lives, settled into that zone with extraordinary precision, and then began actively matching that observatory's every movement. That is not the behavior of inert matter responding to gravitational forces. That is the behavior of something aware of its environment. Consider the energy puzzle one final time. Solar radiation is being absorbed by a 14-kilometer-wide object with no thermal re-emission. The energy is going somewhere. And the micro-oscillations, those rhythmic 0.002-degree corrections firing every 45 minutes like clockwork, suggest that whatever internal process is consuming that absorbed energy, it is operating on a regular, structured cycle. Not chaotic, not random, structured. The three possible explanations remain. A new and completely undiscovered physics, operating through mechanisms our instruments were never built to detect. An exotic natural fragment from the early universe, a piece of matter whose properties would rewrite our textbooks and qualify as the most significant physical discovery ever made. Or an artificial object, built by someone, sent here deliberately, currently parked beside our greatest telescope, and learning everything it can about what we know, what we can see, and how far we have come. There is a reason NASA and ESA moved so quickly to classify the most recent telemetry. There is a reason that emergency sessions were convened behind closed doors. It is not because the data was confusing. Confusion does not trigger that level of institutional response. It is because the data was clear, and what it clearly suggested demanded a response that goes well beyond the normal protocols of astronomical observation. Whatever the ultimate truth turns out to be, the process that leads us to it will change humanity permanently. If the answer is a new physics phenomenon, every spacecraft trajectory, every orbital model, every gravitational map will need to be rebuilt. If the answer is exotic,